Welcome back to the Taped podcast, the most posthumous podcast in the world. We are your hosts, myself, Mickey T.
And me. I'm back, and I'm nostalgia.
He reviews it so you don't have to.
Yes, and that's what I'm going to do today.
As we are reviewing every album that we've decided to think was noteworthy for July. We're doing another recap episode. We're returning with a bang. And we've got a lot of albums to cover here. Some very interesting, some that make us want to die. So yeah, without wasting any more time, let's just get right into it. So, first album we're going to be talking about today is Forever Blue by A.A. Williams. This is the debut album from the UK singer-songwriter. I think this record is very good. Williams' songwriting on this is pretty dark. It often paints a character portrait that shows vulnerability. I like the instrumentation on here as well. It's pretty dark, it's atmospheric, it's somber, and it can be beautiful as well. Plus the drops are fantastic. It's short at only 8 tracks, and I think it's relatively enjoyable for those amount of tracks. It's a tad bit one-dimensional at times though, which does drag it down a bit. And some songs can get kind of formulaic and predictable. But other than that, I took away a decent amount of tracks on this, and I think this is a pretty solid debut.
Yeah, I was quite excited to hear her debut album, as I was quite pleasantly surprised by her debut EP last year. And I think this album delivers just what I would have wanted after hearing that EP. Just kind of the same sound, but in a more complete, fleshed out and finalized form. There are a few tracks I don't care too much for, but the vast majority of the material on Forever Blue is just really well written, really potent and atmospheric dream pop infused post rock, and it never fails to deliver very dark, brooding, and melancholic atmospheres. And I think it's a very good album, and I think it does what it wants to do very well. I also want to point out that this is like the one album that's released on the one non-metal album released on a metal label in the UK. I forget what the label's called. But, you know...
That's pretty funny, honestly.
Yeah. At least so I heard on Rate Your Music. So that's my source. If I get it wrong, that's my source. Blame that website.
If you get it wrong, behead him.
Yeah, it's on like a fucking jazz label or something. I just get the genres mixed up.
Okay, best tracks for me on Forever Blue are Melt and I'm Fine. My least favourite track is Wait, and I gave it a decent 7.
My favourite tracks were Melt, Fearless, Glimmer, Love and Pain, and my least favourite was All I Asked For Was to End It All, and I gave this album a decent to a strong 7.
Moving on, we have Flygod is an Awesome God 2 by Westside Gunn. This is the 4th studio album from the Buffalo rapper and Griselda member. He's been pretty much making waves for about a year now, especially with popular albums like Pray for Paris and getting co-signs from big people in the game like DJ Premier and a lot of old school rappers. But this album to me is essentially the same thing, because the way that I see it, Westside Gunn makes the same album every time. Sometimes I'm fine with it, but like the exceptions I give are Pray for Paris. But this album is just what you'd expect at this point. The dusty, sample-heavy production, Gunn's signature flow, his signature, like, kind of babyish voice, and his obnoxious ad-libs. Usually I find them funny, but I don't know, they're just kind of grating now. There are things on this album that annoy me a fair bit. Like, for one, Gunn doesn't have much presence on his own tracks, bar a couple. Like, he raps for like a minute or a minute and a half at points, and he lets either the features take over, or he just lets the instrumental fade out into a sample. And the interludes are just pointless, and they just ruin the pace of the album. They're just put there for filler. We do get some solid features, though, from the likes of Armani Caesar, Steve God Cooks, and Benny the Butcher. But the way that I see it, this is just another example of quantity over quality. And this is a trend that needs to end. Just stop putting out filler albums and shit like that. For the love of fuck, it's annoying.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of Westside Gunn. I did kind of enjoy his last album, Pray for Paris, but I didn't think it was anything special, if I'm being honest. And this thing, I think, is his worst release yet, at least out of the ones I've heard. I think the beats and instrumentals are just uninteresting, redundant, at times very slappy. The skits are just way too common, and as you said, they completely disrupt the flow of the album. The features were either very good or just really uninteresting and boring, and they're just far too common. It just seems like a one big mess of just features and skits and boring compositions, and all of this crammed into a short 30-minute length that feels like it's double that at times.
Yeah, my favourite tracks from Flygod is an Awesome God 2 are Bubba Chuck, Buffs vs. Wires, and Jose Canseco. My least favourite track is Drive By Love, and I gave this album a decent 6.
My favorite tracks were Michael Irvin, One More Hit, Buffs and Wires. My least favorite tracks were Drive By Love, Rebirth, Steve Burr, and Every Single Skit. And I give this album a strong 4.
Alright, next we have Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon by Pop Smoke. This is the posthumous debut album from the late New York rapper Pop Smoke, who gained waves with his embrace of UK drill and pretty much set like New York to be more of a drill kind of landscape now, because he's definitely inspired a lot of rappers to start embracing drill, more like New York rappers in particular. I'm not a lover of Pop Smoke's music, however. I thought that Meet the Woo 2 was a very one-dimensional and bland and mediocre project. Pretty much every song sounded the same to me, and I'm not the biggest fan of drill anyway. But with this new album, I feel like it's a bit of a cash grab. We do get some stylistic change-ups, and it is co-produced by 50 Cent, but it's very bland and very uninteresting, and it's just an overall mess. We see some drill, R&B, and trap for some reason. The R&B traps are fucking horrendous. Pop Smoke can't sing for shit. 19 tracks is just way too much, and why is Dior a bonus track? It's his most popular song, and I don't get why it's happening. That he has to fucking put their biggest song on the same album 3 times. And the features are an eye roll too, like Lil Baby, Da Baby, Lil TJ, Tyga, Future, and Quavo is on it for 3 times for some reason. Why the fuck is Quavo on it for 3 times? And Roddy Ricch and Swae Lee were fine, but all in all, this is just not good. I just don't like this at all. If you like it, fine, I guess, but this is just not it, and I think this is a cash grab.
Posthumous albums definitely get a bad rep, and I think it would have been in this case, it would have been a nice sentiment to have a somewhat interesting posthumous album, just to say that, Pop Smoke has released an album, a full-length album, studio album, but this is just so forced and so rough around the edges that it feels kind of disingenuous. The production at times is just insufferable. It doesn't go anywhere interesting whatsoever. The songs are all over the place, especially when it comes to the features, which are just kind of squeezed into tracks very forcefully and don't fit the flow a lot of the times, don't fit the just overall energy of the track. Quavo, yeah. And just overall, it just seems like a very sloppy, just as you said, cash grab, just to get something out as soon as possible, before, people start to forget the name or something. Just get the album out, and I would have liked to have enjoyed it, but there's nothing really here that I can enjoy, to be honest.
Okay, my favourite tracks from Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon are Make It Rain and Got It On Me. The worst tracks are Diana and Snitching, and I gave this album a strong 4.
My favourite tracks were Gangsters and Make It Rain, and my least favourite tracks were West Coast Shit, Enjoy Yourself, and Mood Swings, and I gave it a strong 3.
Moving on, we have... we have Shadow Work by Trapt. This is the 9th studio album from the California alt-metal band, and when they aren't making complete asses of themselves on Twitter, they are making some basic-ass, overproduced ballad metal that sounds like it came straight from the early 2000s. The production on this album is just so bland, it's overproduced, it's soulless. There might be a nice riff or some solid drums here and there, but it's just so vapid, it's almost hollow in a sense, and not in a good way. The songwriting is shallow, extremely basic, it's vapid, and it's just not good. Every track is trying way too hard to be deep and emotive, but it just comes off so forced. The vocals aren't great either, they're just so nondescript and generic, and The band themselves just lack so much personality. Like, people will only know this band for like one song, and that's it. For an album that's 44 minutes long and only 12 tracks, it just felt like an eternity. It's easily one of the worst releases of the year so far, and there's a reason why Trapt are just a joke at this stage and often considered one of the worst acts alive. And oh yeah, also I just forgot to say, big congrats on the 600 first week sales, guys. They're really giving Taylor Swift a run for her money.
600, bro.
I'm not even kidding.
I'd love to see just a fucking room with those 600 people. Probably smells like shit.
It probably just smells like swamp ass and Monster Energy.
Beer. Yeah, I don't know what I can possibly say about this. It's just one post-grunge / radio metal cliche after another, and these tropes just are insufferable, like in small portions, but for a whole album length, it's just fucking hard to sift through. There's nothing really to analyze here. It's just crap.
That's true. The best track is Make Out Alive. The worst is Everything Else. And I gave this album a light 1.
My favorite track was Save Your Soul. Everything else for worst tracks. I gave this album a light 2.
Okay, moving on. We got Zerwee Part 2 by Billy Cobb. This is the 6th album from the singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and content creator. And I'm being honest here, I wanted to like this album considering I do enjoy the first Zerwee EP he put out last year, and I am a fan of Billy's content, but I just couldn't bring myself to enjoy it. I'll give him some credit. He does a good job at making the Weezer aesthetic, but to me it just sounded like leftovers from Everything Will Be Alright in the End and just like shit B-sides from Pinkerton. Like, the instrumental work at times can be a little shoddy, the songwriting has some quirky concepts, but it just comes off a bit like forced and a bit corny, and I feel like Billy isn't doing enough to keep them interesting. Like, I'm hopeful for him, as he clearly had a vision in mind, and he has executed this a lot better on Zerwee, but part 2 just wasn't it. Billy, I'm sorry, please come on the podcast.
I fucking hated this. I fucking hated every second of this. I don't know what to say about this. You know, it's kind of, it feels like what Greta Van Fleet do at Led Zeppelin, except it's self-aware. But does that make it better? In my opinion, no, not at all. Just because it sounds like Pinkerton doesn't mean it's as good as Pinkerton. This is just, oh god. I have rarely physically cringed so hard listening through an album as I have listening through this. You know, sure, his Rivers impression is good. That does not make the music good. This is just really fucking lifeless, really drab, really cringy. The songwriting is just so much worse than it is on Pinkerton, and it really drags down any even novelty enjoyment I could have gotten out of this. I don't think there's any reason for this album to exist. If you want to hear Pinkerton, just listen to Pinkerton. It's easy as that. This is awful.
The best tracks.
I apologize.
No, you don't. The best tracks are Bargain Mart, Oceans in Her Hair, and the worst tracks are I Wish That I Was Younger and Blockbuster Video. And this sounds like a strong 3.
My favorite track was Bargain Mart. My least favorite tracks was absolutely everything else, especially Blockbuster Video. And I give this album a very light 2 out of 10.
Okay, moving on, we got Bdrmm by Bdrmm. This is the debut studio album from the UK dream pop act, and the band managed to pull together a pretty solid dream pop album, but they don't really do much else outside of that. They make some pretty decent dreamy soundscapes, but I feel like there's a lot more room to improve aesthetically, as this just sounds like any other dream pop album. The playing is pretty good, the singing is decent, and the soundscapes sound good, but it just leaves me wanting a bit more, but I'm hopeful for some improvement in the future. Other than that, this is just pretty serviceable.
I don't think this is cutting edge or groundbreaking anyway. I think that they definitely were their influences on their sleeve, most notably definitely Beach House. But for a debut album, I think there's still enough identity and personality and unique aesthetics to be found here, and I do think that it is a very enjoyable, not entirely groundbreaking, not entirely just cutting edge, but still enjoyable, atmospheric post-rocky dream pop experience. And, you know, in a month with admittedly a good few really unmemorable albums, I'll take this. I'll definitely take this.
Alright, the best tracks from Bdrmm are Gush, If, and A Reason to Celebrate. My least favourite track was Unhappy, and I gave this album a strong 6.
My favourite tracks were Push Pull, Gush, Happy, If, and my least favourite track was also Unhappy, and I gave this a decent 6.
Alright, next we have So When You Gonna by
Wait, did
Dreamwife.
you skip one before Bdrmm?
Oh yeah, I did. Oh yeah, for a reason. It's what was it called? What is it called again? Everything Strange
Joseph
Here by
Easy.
G-Eazy, by Mr. Goulding. And to be fair, I'm glad I skipped over this because that album's bad. It's just really bad, man.
Why is he gotta
Why?
do this? Why?
Why?
There's no reason.
Why? Gerald,
You didn't have to
did
do
you
this.
really have to butcher Lazarus?
Gerald,
Did you really?
look
did you really
at
just
yourself
make
in the mirror.
Gerald,
Look at yourself
did
in
you-
the fucking mirror.
Gerald, did you really just make a song that has the same chord progression to Where Is My Mind by the Pixies? We've all heard that fucking track, dude. What do you want?
Gerald, look in the fucking mirror and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Who listens to fucking G-Eazy?
Who the fuck listens to Mr. G-Eazy, the
Bro,
white
what are you-
Macklemore?
What are you? Oh, I wanna be fucking Easy-E. Fuck off, Gerald.
Gerald,
cunt.
piss off. You look like a fucking
No one
greaser
cares.
and you're a rapper. Come on.
Fucking hell.
Fuck off, Gerald. Fuck off.
Bruh.
Bruh.
Gerald, why you fucking making rap and not working at my fucking local Sports Direct, huh?
Gerald, you shouldn't be making rap. You should be working on my fucking motorbike. Come on. Gerald.
Gerald, fuck
Fuck
you.
you on. Fuck you,
Absolute
Gerald.
cunt.
Fuck you. Fucking bitch.
That being said, I don't think it was the worst album this month.
It's one of the worst for me.
Um,
Okay, so next we have So When You Gonna by Dreamwife. This is
just give her ratings at least.
Light 2.
Like 3.
Alright, next we
That's all
have
you're
So
getting,
When You...
Gerald.
For fuck's sake, can I move on? I want to forget this mess
Yeah.
exists. I literally tried to move on to the next album like 4 times already.
Don't
Alright,
blame me.
next we have So When You Gonna by Dreamwife. This is the sophomore album from the UK indie rock band. And I'm very mixed on this album for a number of reasons. For one, there are a couple of tracks here that are just genuinely god-awful. Whether we're talking about the just cheesy concepts or the just obnoxious vocals. But then there's just tracks on here that I think are genuinely great and they have some good songwriting or instrumentation. And then it has tracks that are just pretty forgettable. And I don't know, it's just weird. I don't think it's horrendous, but it has its bad moments, and it's somewhat decent, I guess. But for now, I just don't like this at all.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's such a mixed bag. If I was to only hear some of the tracks I liked more on this album, I probably would have been really excited and anticipating this release a lot more. But there's just so many tracks that are so different from one another. On one hand, the more laid back and breezy tracks are really good, I think, a lot of the time. They're really catchy, really well written, really creatively played and produced, and really fun overall. But then the more Riot Girl inspired tracks are just a real fucking slog to listen to. The vocals are horrendous. The production is just messy. The delivery is just annoying. Songwriting is horrendous. There's 2 sides to this album, and they're so different to one another that it's really confusing. This is definitely the hardest I've ever had to think about what I was gonna fucking rate an album. Because if I was rating it off the better tracks, I would have given this a strong 7 or something. But if I was rating off the worst tracks, I would have given this like a fucking G-Eazy rating. Bruh, sorry,
Easy.
No.
Oh,
But
Christ.
what is this? This is...
Go to bed. God.
I just woke up. It's okay. Yeah, this is bad. This is really bad. No, it's not really bad. It's really confusing. I will say that.
That's
much.
true. It is very confusing. Best tracks in this were Hasta La Vista, Temporary, You Do You, and Right Here, Right Now. The worst tracks, So When You Got and Homesick. And I think this album is like a strong 4 to a light 5.
I think we agree completely here. Almost. My favorite tracks were Temporary, You Do You, Old Flame, and Right Here, Right Now, which I think is fucking incredible.
Yeah,
And
like that's genuinely
it's
an amazing
one of my
track.
favorite. Yeah, it's one of my favorite tracks of the year so far. But then on the other hand, we have some of my least favorite tracks of the year in Sports, Homesick, and So When You Gonna. I gave this album a decent to strong 4, I guess. That's subject to change, maybe.
I don't know. This album was confusing as fuck. All right, so moving on, we have Legends Never Die by Juice WRLD. This is the long-awaited posthumous album from the late rapper who passed away back in December, and apparently there's more albums to come, so that's not a good sign. Honestly, with Legends Never Die, this is an actual tasteful posthumous release. Thankfully, like it feels like something Juice WRLD would definitely make. Despite how long it is, Juice WRLD was on the filler trap wave even before he died. Like, his last album, Death Race for Love, was 22 tracks, so this is excusable. It does have its fair share of issues, though. Like, it's a bit bloated. Like, I never liked that about a lot of Juice WRLD albums, that they were that long. And it has some songs that just don't work for me, and some songs that are just straight up filler and garbage. Like the songs, like that one song with fucking Marshmello was terrible. I like a fair few tracks on here, though. A lot of the production is good. Most of the features are great. A lot of Juice's performances are great. And the production is very tasteful. So, yeah, it's just a tasteful posthumous album. And it's decent in itself, but it's not perfect. It does have some tracks that just make me fucking eye roll. But other than that, I think it's decent.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely kind of went in the Mac Miller direction in actually making a posthumous album that represented what the artists themselves would have wanted to put out, and not just what the label imagines would get the most streams. This was definitely tasteful, and I think the songs on here overall make for what is probably his best project ever. It's surprisingly polished, sincere. They sound like Juice WRLD songs and not just random demo scraps turned into some weak excuse for a fucking trap rap song with like 2 verses repeating. There are one of the 2 tracks that I do think are a bit forced or just a bit off, especially the Marshmello collab. But overall, I think this is a very earnest, very pleasant tribute to the rapper's actual work, more so than it is a obvious money grab, and grave robbery. And even if it is, then it's pretty well hidden and pretty well executed, I'll give him that. And yeah, there's a lot of great tracks on here. Production is crisp a lot of the time. Juice WRLD's verses are engaging. They're surprisingly diverse and eclectic a lot of the times. And yeah, I did enjoy this.
Alright, my favourite tracks are Life's a Mess, Righteous, Hate the Other Side, Can't Die, Wishing Well and Stay High. My least favourite tracks are Come and Go, Tell Me You Love Me and Man of the Year. And this album is a decent 6.
My favourite tracks were Titanic, Conversations, Righteous, Tell Me You Love Me, I Want It, Wishing Well, Up Up and Away, and Stay High. My least favourite tracks were Bad Energy, Blood on My Jeans, and Come and Go. And I gave this album a strong 6.
Alright. Our next album is It Selfish to Talk About Me by Kacy Hill. I believe this is the second album from the Arizona singer-songwriter, and this album is pretty decent for the most part. The album contains some pretty ethereal and vibey and warm R&B production across the board with a bit of a poppy twist. As a vocalist, I think Kacy is pretty good when she works well over these instrumentals. But I feel like this album is a bit too much of a vibe, if you know what I mean. Like, a lot of the tracks just blend into each other. The production will get a bit monotonous, and Kacy doesn't really do much to overcome that monotony. But other than that, there are a fair few tracks that I do enjoy on here, but then the rest just kind of blends into each other. Just all in all, it's a decent record, and I see Kacy might have potential to make something that's genuinely great, and I hope she does. In all honesty.
Yeah, I do think this album has some moments that are quite promising. I think Kacy shows off a lot of versatility with her songwriting and her performances. But I think there are just too many tracks on here that are just way too unmemorable, way too kind of unsure of themselves. The production on a lot of this album is just very minimal and not in a really atmospheric way, just more in a kind of fucking boring way. It does have a few genuine standout tracks, but just not enough to kind of make this project seem like it's, you know, a coming out kind of big step up in her career. It does kind of show some promise, but it doesn't really make a name for itself, and it doesn't really, you know, prove that Kacy Cahill can still succeed without good music. But I think she is talented, and I think that maybe a few releases down the line we'll be looking back at this as a stepping stone towards something greater.
Alright. The best tracks from me are Porsche, Palladium, and Just to Say. My least favourite track is Unkind, and I gave this album a decent 6.
My favourite tracks were Porsche, To Someone Else, Dinner, I Believe in You. My least favourite tracks were Just to Say and Palladium, and I gave this album a decent 5.
Next we have Healing is a Miracle by Julianna Barwick. This is the 5th solo album from the American producer and singer Julianna Barwick, and I admire a lot of the ambient soundscapes and the dreamy vibe of this album, but I feel like it's a bit too much of a vibe. Like, each of the tracks sound great at times, and they do have some genuinely good sounds to them, but they can get very tedious and somewhat bland with how one note a lot of the predictable formulas can be. Like, one track even reminds me of like a really bad fucking Grimes ripoff because of the vocals for some reason. It sounds like a fucking, it came straight from the abortion bin off of fucking Miss Anthropocene. It's short and it does what it sets out to do very well in my opinion, but it just does little to intrigue anything from me. It has decent sounds, but other than that, I don't see myself returning to it a lot of the time.
While this album is pretty and atmospheric, it does kind of fall into the category of pretty and atmospheric ambient albums that don't really go anywhere exciting or cutting edge. And I think that's what really stops it from, you know, getting more praise for me. It's good. It's definitely enjoyable to listen to. It's definitely atmospheric and dreamy, but also, you know, there's nothing really that stands out and, you know, makes me want to desperately come back to listen to it again and again and again. It's just, if you're a fan of ambient, I think this is something worth experiencing, but it's not something that I would ever consider for like, oh, my favorite ambient album of the year or anything that would really blow me away. It's just a pleasant, lush little ambient album with not a lot to it.
That's fair. My favourite tracks are Porsche, Palladium... No, wrong. I'm reading my notes wrong, for fuck's sake. Favourite tracks are Healing is a Miracle, In Spirit, and Oh Memory. The worst track is Flowers, and I gave this album a light 6.
My favourite tracks were Oh Memory, Healing is a Miracle, Wishing Well, and Nod, and my least favourite track was In Spirit, and I gave this album a decent 6.
Alright. Moving on, we got Jump Rope Gazers by the Beths. This is the sophomore album from the New Zealand indie rock and power pop band. And I haven't heard the debut, but I'm willing to give it a try because I enjoyed this album a fair bit. I think the instrumentation is very pleasant and very catchy. I think the melodies are pretty nostalgic of a lot of old indie rock and power pop bands and reminiscent of like a lot of 90s bands too. The power chords sound great, and I love the guitar specifically on here. I think Elizabeth Stokes vocals are very good throughout the album. She does a fair bit to add to the catchiness. I can't speak today. Sure, it's not the most original or mind-blowing record ever, but it's certainly a very fun album that I could definitely see myself returning to. And definitely, there's plenty of standout tracks on here. And yeah, I enjoyed this a fair bit, in all honesty.
I fucking love this album. I'm really impressed. I haven't heard their debut. I definitely have to go back and listen to that. But this pretty much has everything I look for in a great power pop album. Just really powerful, energetic, and relentless instrumentation that knows when to kind of take a break and turn into pleasant and vibrant and emotional. It's just fun, it's infectious, it's breezy. It has some... This is just one of the most fun albums I've heard all year, and I really cannot recommend it enough to fans of indie rock or power pop. The songwriting is brilliant. It's so catchy. The vocals are perfect. They match the instrumentation very well to have this kind of breezy, but also very energetic kind of energy between the vocals and the instrumentation. This whole album is just fucking great. I loved it.
Alright, my favourite tracks from Jump Rope Gazers are I'm Not Getting Excited, Dying to Believe, Jump Rope Gazers, and Out of Sight. My least favourite tracks are Mars the God of War, and I gave this album a decent 7.
My favourite tracks were I'm Not Getting Excited, Dying to Believe, Jump Rope Gazers, Do You Want Me Now, Out of Sight, You're a Beam of Light. And my least favourite track was Don't Go Away, and I gave this album a light 8.
Alright. Next, we have None of Us Are Getting Out of This Alive by The Streets. This is the second mixtape by The Streets project that's run by Mike Skinner. If I'm being honest here, it's a contender for some of the worst albums I've heard this year. Like, the production on this album is just fucking awful. It just sounds very bad sonically. It sounds like he doesn't even know that music has evolved past 2002. Like, Mike's rapping isn't good either. His wordplay and his flows feel almost non-existent. The hooks are terrible. And it's just grating. I mean, the guests are the best thing about the album, but fuck me, they were so underwhelming, especially from like Idols and Tame Impala. And what's funny about this is that
I only found out Tame Impala was on the first track, like on my third list.
Like, they sounded like they didn't even want to be there. Like, there's even like a noisy documentary about this mixtape, and literally everyone he's talking to looks like there's like, why the fuck am I even here? Like, they don't even want to be here. There was meant to be a slow tie feature, but it was cut from the album for some reason. Like, I don't know, it's just fucking awful, dude. Nah, the funniest part about this whole thing for me was when he was talking to fucking Tame Impala on FaceTime. He just looked fucking severely depressed. He didn't want to fucking be there. Like, Jesus Christ, this thing was awful. And
wait, who didn't?
Tame Impala. Like, there's just barely anything about this album other than some of the features, but other than that, no, nah, Mike, no.
I will say, it sounds like a Streets album. It just doesn't sound like a very good one. If you're a fan of original pirate material, I think it's a pretty good album. I think it's a tad bit overrated, but if you're a fan, maybe you're just hypnotized into liking everything he puts out, and maybe you'll find some enjoyment out of this. But if you weren't sold on The Streets already, just don't bother. You're just going to waste your time with this. This is the most sloppy, the most just all over the place, most dated, most awkward album The Streets, under The Streets moniker ever. It's just, it's a horrid mess of just sloppy ideas, even sloppier executions. I think it's a far cry from kind of the charm and the energy of original pirate material. It's just so bad. It's boring, it's uneventful, it's awkward, it's dated, it's everything. It's everything negative.
True. My favourite tracks are Call My Phone, Thinking I'm Doing Better, and None of Us Are Getting Out of This Alive. The rest of it is awful, so they're all the worst tracks, and I gave this album a light 3.
My favorite track was Take Me As I Am. My least favorite track was Everything Else, and I gave this album a light 2.
Alright, next we have 333 by Bladee. This is the third solo studio album from Drain Gang affiliate and member Bladee, and his follow-up, he's following this up with the Exeter mixtape that he dropped earlier this year, which honestly I didn't like at first, but I gave it another chance last week and it grew on me a bit. And the first time I heard 333 I thought was horrendous, like every other Bladee project before this, but giving it more of a chance, honestly it's not that bad. I actually think it's good. Like, the production has always been a saving grace for Blade's music for me, and this time around he doesn't really box himself into just cloud rap, but he just takes inspired elements from different genres like all R&B, ambient pop, and to some degree a bit shoegaze, more particularly on the track Hundreds. Blade's vocals, while not being the best still, they've improved immensely in my opinion. Sure, he still sounds like he's 13, but he seems to have like come into his own vocally, and they don't sound grating to me in the slightest, whereas on projects like Ice Dancer and Red Light, they just sounded fucking horrendous. And they actually matched the like dreamy production this time around. The first half isn't the best, but there are some issues that I had with it, either because Blade's vocals are just a bit off, or the mixing in the instrumentals was just shit. But after track 9, it just picks up quite a lot, and I genuinely enjoyed these songs immensely, and honestly, I'm actually glad that this is probably another Drain Gang fucking project that I enjoy. Like, I like E, and I like this as well. So, yeah, that's all I really have to say.
My sentiments aren't quite the same. Every time Bladee releases a new album, I just get filled with this optimism that the sound will finally click with me. I'll finally, my brain will expand, and I'll be like, I finally understand Bladee. But every time, I just get disappointed. I do understand the appeal. I do understand what people could hear in this and gravitate towards and enjoy, but it does nothing for me. I know it's a cliche thing to say. The vocals are fucking awful. I hate them. I cannot sit through them. They ruin otherwise interesting concepts, production-wise, even songwriting-wise. And when it comes to production, I think it's probably worse than on Exeter. I think it's at times a bit too monotonous and all compressed and clumped together to the point where it just doesn't sound very good. I don't know how else to put it. There's some tracks that I did enjoy. I will say that his sound isn't completely lost on me. It's just too blown out, too messy, and once again, I'm just not a fan of his style. I don't know if I ever will be, but you fucking bet that next time he releases an album, I'll be like, oh, this is the one that'll click with me. And you bet I'll be disappointed.
Fair, I guess. This is truly like the scene in fucking episode 3 Star Wars. You're fucking... I'm fucking Anakin, you're Obi-Wan, and the lava's just Bladee albums. Alright, my favourite tracks on 333 were Valerie, It Girl, Only One, Oh Well, Finder, Ecstasia, and Swan Lake. My least favourite track was Hundreds, and I gave this a light 7.
My favourite tracks were Mean Girls and Innocent of All Things. My least favourite tracks were Wings in Motion, Don't Worry, and Valerie, and I gave this a strong 3.
Moving on, all the drainers are just going to come for your neck now.
I know, it's just... I'm sorry. It's not like I'm forcing myself to not like it. I'd love to, but I just can't.
Fair. Moving on, we have Ultimate Success Today by Protomartyr. This is the 5th studio album from the Michigan post-punk band, and the band deliver one of my favourite releases of the year, in all honesty. They create a 10-track, 40-minute experience of just pure post-punk bangers, in my opinion. The production on this album is very dark, and it can be atmospheric in as well, and each track is pretty dense in what it's trying to do. I think the production is very textured, it's very layered, And it's just what I would want from a great post-punk album. Like, each track on here captivated me with its dark sounds, its loud guitars, its jittery drum patterns, and there's great vocal performances here too. It never got stale for me at all. I'm loving a lot of what I'm hearing on here. This is probably like a top 10 album for me so far this year, and Jesus, like, they're adding to numerous great post-punk releases that just keep pumping out nowadays. And honestly, I'm here for it.
Yeah, honestly, if Idols deliver, then this is a hell of a year for post-punk.
Yeah.
Yeah, Protomartyr have been a band that's been on my radar since their 2017 release, Relatives in Descent, which I still fondly look back on as one of the best albums of that year, and just a breath of fresh air, and, you know, one of the better post-punk albums in the last few years. And I think Ultimate Success Today picks up exactly where that album left off. It just continues their brash, bleak, and powerful sound equally as effectively as their last album. I do still think that Relatives in Descent is the better album, but I think this is a very, very, what's the fucking word?
Good.
Forget how to English. Yeah, this is very, very good. No, it's a... It's a very, very respectable, you know, second album, and if you like the first album, I'm sure you'll like this. Or vice versa, if you like this and you haven't checked out Relatives in Descent, definitely do. I think that album is one of the better post-punk albums of the 2010s. But anyways, great album, fantastic performances, interesting and oftentimes quite bleak and atmospheric sound, and I loved it, yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I loved it. I really liked it.
I'd actually be willing to check out that album now. Actually, I'm loving a lot of what Protomartyr are doing. I need to check out more of their stuff. All right, my favorite tracks from Ultimate Success Today are Tranquilizer, Processed by the Boys, June 21, and Michigan Hammers. My least favorite song is I Am You Now, and I gave this album a decent 8.
My favorite tracks were I Am You Now, The Aphorist, Michigan Hammers, Tranquilizer, Modern Business Hymns. My least favorite tracks were Bridge and Clown and Day Without End, and I gave this album a strong 7.
Alright, moving on, we have Ugly is Beautiful by Oliver Tree. This is the long-awaited debut album from the California singer, songwriter, producer, rapper, and personality, Oliver Tree.
Definitely a personality.
Yeah, highlight personality. With it being pushed back and delayed many times, and it's supposedly being complete since 2016, I feel like it's hard to ignore a lot of the datedness of this album. With that being said, though, there's a ton of great production that blends elements of, you know, hip-hop, pop punk, etc., alongside some really catchy choruses, outsider lyricism, and some fun and charismatic vocals. But I feel like the issue that lies for me is that the songwriting is just super fucking repetitive. It just gets formulaic, and pretty much each track outside of, I think, 1993 just sounds exactly the same. Like, I don't know. Like, I guess I'm just not that big into Oliver Tree as a character either. I just don't really care much for the personality behind it. And honestly, there is potential for Oliver, and I hope he reaches that potential, but I don't know, I'm just not feeling a lot of what Oliver Tree has been putting out all that much.
On the contrary, I'm quite fond of the whole personality behind Oliver Tree. I love the shtick he's doing right now, where he's just really, really passive-aggressive on interviews. And I especially love when the hosts play along with the shtick. And, you know, his blend of pop rap, emo pop, pop punk, among a plethora of other things, has always been something that I had a real soft spot for. And this long-awaited full-length project doesn't disappoint in my eyes. It basically, at times, plays out like a best hits compilation with tracks like Alien Boy and Hurt, which I've been fond of for a very long time, appearing on here, on top of a plethora of new tracks that mostly more than live up to the previously mentioned tracks in terms of quality. They connect the dots very well to form a nicely structured pop album with buckets full of charisma, energy, everything to keep the listening fun throughout. Apparently this is the project that Oliver Tree always wanted to put out. Apparently his label forced him to put out the EPs. He didn't really want to do this. This is the definitive Oliver Tree album in his eyes, and it definitely sounds like it to me. And I hope this isn't his last album, as he's been saying. It's really hard to know what's real and what isn't with Oliver Tree, but I really enjoyed this.
Alright, my favourite tracks from Ugly is Beautiful are 1993, Cash Machine and Joke's on You. My least favourite track is Again and Again, and I gave this album a strong 6.
My favourite tracks were Me, Myself and I, Cash Machine, Alien Boy, Hurt, Again and Again, and I'm Gone. And also a Song of the Year contender, I will say, 1993. And my least favourite track was probably Joke's on You, and I gave this album a light 8.
Okay, moving on, we got Brightest Blue by Ellie Goulding. This is the 4th studio album from the UK singer-songwriter, and this album has some good qualities that I like about it. Like, Ellie's vocals sound good for the most part, the production sounds decent and varied, if a bit overproduced, and the lyrics on this album in particular are very personal, and I feel like they're well written. The problem, though, lies with the track list and the sounds that she rips off, and this is pretty apparent where she rips off like people like SZA or to some degree Lord or The Weeknd, and it just annoyed the shit out of me. Also, it has just so much filler going on in it. It's got like 19 songs on here. 3 of it were pretty pointless, and 1 is just a bonus track. It's over an hour in length, and I just got bored of it, mostly because these songs ranged from decent to mediocre to bad. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about it.
I will say this isn't awful. It really isn't awful, but it's so run-of-the-mill, uninspired, and inoffensively produced that it almost would have been better off being awful. It's like the pop equivalent of rice crackers. It just is like Ellie Goulding is acting as some sort of fucking shapeshifter that's just turning into pop trope after pop trope, and not to mention the fact that her vocals never really did much for me. I can't think of a Ellie Goulding track from yesteryear that I genuinely loved. Maybe her collab with Skrillex. I think that track is fantastic, but overall her career has just been filled with boring track after boring track for me, and this isn't really any exception when it comes to the vocals and her performance. It ranges to, her vocals range from whatever, it's fine, to not very good at all, and it never really goes higher or lower. It's just very inoffensive. It's just quite boring. There are a few good tracks, I will say, but overall, it's just, I can't really recommend this to anyone. It's a bit of a hard album to sit through, especially at the length of it.
Alright, I agree. The best tracks for me are New Heights, Bleach, and Hate Me. The worst tracks are Worry About Me and Tides, and this album is a decent 4.
My favourite tracks were Power, Close to Me, Hate Me, and 16. My least favourite tracks were How Deep Is Too Deep, New Heights, Tides, and Woman. And I give this album a light 4.
Moving on, we have Telas by Nicolas Jaar. This is the latest album from the producer Nicolas Jaar, who's been on a bit of a roll this year with albums like Against All Logic, under the Against All Logic name, and what was it, Senazaz? Was that what it was called from earlier on this year?
I can't fucking pronounce IDM titles.
Well, honestly, yeah, this is his 3rd release, and in all honesty, this is probably my favourite of the 3 albums that he's released this year. I like how super ambient this album is. He's already toyed with like the somewhat ambient sounds of Senazaz, but I was captivated more this time around. And this is asking a lot. It's pretty long, and it's 4 very long tracks, but for me, they all managed to stay very interesting and left me feeling like there wasn't really much of a dull moment. Like, the ambient soundscapes are very serene, and they're combined with like eerie, glitchy, watery, and sharp sounding percussion, and the melodic bass or the synthwork sounds pretty fucking fantastic to me. Honestly, I enjoy this a fair bit. I just like having this playing in the background while I'm playing video games or some shit, and it's actually really good to me. It's probably my favourite release from Nicolas Jaar this year, and I'm all here for it.
I did enjoy this album. I just wasn't really blown away. I think it's a very eclectic, off-kilter, and unsettling IDM album that certainly stands out as probably his most ambitious this year and in recent memory. And it's honestly quite a crazy listening experience for an ambient album. The tracks are equal parts soft and ambient as they are glitchy, rugged, and hasty. And while it's not my personal favourite release from him, I do think that his other two releases this year, I preferred those. It's still, definitely an enjoyable album and definitely one that I would recommend. It's really a strange and at times visceral listening experience that is, certainly something that you have to hear for yourself to kind of understand. And I can definitely see why people would gravitate to this a lot. It's definitely an interesting album. Just not really my cup of tea entirely. I did still like it.
That's fair. I can respect that. My favorite tracks are... Yeah, shut up. Our best tracks are Telehumo, and my least favorite track is Telehora. And I gave this album a light 8. I hope I pronounced those two tracks right. Fuck me.
Probably. My favorite tracks were Telehora and Telehumo, and my least favorite track was Telensima, and I gave this album a light 6.
Next, we have No Pressure by Logic. This is the 6th and supposed final album from Maryland rapper Logic, and I have a bit of a weird relationship with Logic's music. Like, I loved his older material to death when I was in secondary school, but like, ever since Everybody, he's just been going on a downward spiral of oversaturating the market with like mediocrity and just utter fucking garbage. Most notably, the two albums he put out last year, fucking Supermarket and Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Those are fucking dumpster fires. And like, going into this, I just wanted Logic to end his career on a high note, a somewhat high note, and this album was executive produced by No ID, and I feel like he truly left his mark on the record, as this is easily one of Logic's best produced albums. It has the same vibe as Under Pressure. It has these like kind of chill wave inspired beats with brilliant sampling, nice melodies, and an almost boom bap and organic sounding percussion. Some moments are a little weird, but I didn't mind it. Logic is good on here for the most part. He just stops the fucking bullshit that he's been saying, like all the fucking cringy shit people won't take him seriously for. He's pretty thematic with the same things that he's talked about on Under Pressure, while also bringing the context of his career into perspective and his new family and stuff. And he does tend to do what I normally dislike at some times, like maybe a couple of corny lines here and there, a few kind of ribbity-dibbity moments, but for the most part he was good. Honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better send-off for Logic, even though I don't love it. I'm happy that Logic left off with a decent finish, and I wish him the best of luck with his future endeavours, and I hope that he can be the best father that he can be. And yeah, that's just my take.
Yeah, if this is really Logic's final album, then in my eyes, I think he's finished up his rapping career with his best album yet. The Logic on No Pressure is pretty much at times unrecognizable from the Logic we've been hearing for most of the latter end of the last decade, especially last year. This album is focused. The flows are sticky, grimy, gritty. The lyricism is a lot of the time quite clever and well written, which is something that's I haven't really heard since his early projects. His last few projects have just been a real fucking mess when it comes to the lyrics, but he seriously steps up here. He's, I think, firing at all cylinders. The instrumentations are really hard-hitting, they're exciting, unlike the fucking monotonous drab that Logic has been rapping over on the last few albums, especially Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, because he was barely fucking rapping on the Supermarket, was he? There's still a good share of tracks that didn't impress me all too much. I think the whole album does kind of drag, as I don't think the last half is as strong as the first. But overall, it's still a good album, I think, especially by Logic's recent standard. By Logic's recent standards, it's a fucking masterpiece. Also, the fucking interludes were quite funny. I don't know. I especially love the one where it was like, what was it like? A copious amount of anime was watched during the recording of this album, or something that.
Yeah, those were pretty funny, honestly. I'm happy for Logic at this stage. So yeah. The best tracks for me.
Good album.
Yeah, good album. The best tracks for me were Heard Him Say, Open Mike Aquarius 3, Dad Bod, and possibly my song of the year, Soul Food 2. And I gave this album a light to decent 7.
My favorite tracks were No Pressure Intro, GP4, Celebration, Soul Food 2, and Heard Him Say. And my least favorite track was Hit My Line, and I gave this album a strong 6.
Alright, next we have Folklore by Taylor Swift. And we don't really need an introduction for Taylor Swift at this stage. At this point, other than that, Folklore is her 8th studio album. And this time around we see Taylor go full folk pop and indie folk in a sense. And I feel like she pulls this style off very well. The production on this album is very intricate. It's beautiful. At times it could sound absolutely gorgeous. I think Taylor herself is just very good on this album. I love her vocals on here, and her clever songwriting is just really great on here. The only real issue that I have with this album though is that it's a little bit too long and at times a bit derivative, but other than that, this is probably her best album in my opinion, and I don't really have much else to say besides that.
I don't think it's her best album. I still prefer 1989, which was one of my favorite pop albums in recent memory. But this is definitely a high point, especially artistically for Taylor Swift. Commercially as well. I actually don't know.
800,000.
Yeah, this is doing the fucking numbers. So good job, Taylor Swift. The indie folk sophistopop approach is executed very well here, in my opinion. I think the instrumentation is fantastic throughout, and the instrumentation is personally my favorite aspect of the album. It's very lush, very breezy, very organic, and I think it helps to perfectly set up the atmosphere of the album and, set up a foundation for Taylor Swift to build upon. Songwriting isn't always great, admittedly, but a lot of the tracks are still well written, retrospective, and moody, and certainly well performed and make for an exciting, good album, and one that is easy to sit through, even though it's on the longer side. Is it like 50-something minutes? Is
something
that correct?
Like that.
Yeah, even though it's almost an hour long, it does make use of that time very well. It doesn't really drag in my eyes. It does have some low moments, but I think that the high moments are a lot more commonplace. Yeah, I enjoyed this.
Alright, my favourite tracks were Exile, August, Mirror Ball, Epiphany, and This Is Me Trying. My least favourite track is Peace and Mad Woman, and I gave this album a decent 7.
My favourite tracks were The Last Great American Dynasty, Exile, Mirror Ball, August, and Betty, and my least favourite track was The One. I wrote these notes a few weeks ago, and I have 6 out of 10 written down here, but I think I'm going to give this album a light 7.
Alright. Next we have Lianne Havas, the self-titled album. This is the 3rd studio album from the UK singer-songwriter, and I feel like Lianne delivers one of my favourite neo-soul records of the year that has some stellar, very warm production, very personal songwriting, and just some fantastic vocals. The poem's songwriting tackles like Lianne's insecurities, relationships, and anxieties, and this is like accompanied by the dreamlike and organic production that just blows me away at how really great it sounds, and the textures are varied as hell. I love the way they sound. The instrumentals aren't just great because of how well crafted they are. I feel like they're emphasized a lot more by Lianne's vibrant and amazing vocals, and I love that when she goes all out and when it's lower, it's pretty distinct. The Weird Fishes cover kicks ass in my opinion, and it's easily one of the best covers I've heard this year so far. Not only because it's my favorite Radiohead song, but because it was just a great cover in general. I liked Lianne's twist on it. So yeah, that's all I really have to say.
Yeah, this album is, I would say, straightforward, but that's not a complaint whatsoever. I think it's a very organic and personal approach for Lianne, and while this thing hasn't won me over completely, I have to admit that, it's a very personal, very almost dreamy and lush and breezy album that is really hard not to enjoy. I don't think I was blown away as much as a lot of people were, but I think that this album definitely deserves a few more listens for me, and it's definitely going to get that. And hopefully it'll grow on me a bit more, but from what I've heard, this is definitely good. And her performances were definitely impressive. Instrumentation was mostly good. I didn't care for some of the tracks, but mostly it was very organic, very straight to the point and simple. And that kind of made for a more... Dude, I can't speak today. That definitely made more for an intimate album, and one that's, I think, going to grow on me.
Okay. My favourite tracks were Bittersweet, Weird Fishes, Please Don't Make Me Cry, and Read My Mind. My least favourite track was Green Papaya, and I gave this album a decent 8.
My favourite tracks were Bittersweet, Read My Mind, Weird Fishes, and 7 Times. And my least favourite track was Green Papaya, and for now this is a decent 6.
Okay, next we have Miles by Blu Exile. And this is the latest collaborative effort from the West Coast hip-hop duo Blu Exile, and they're well known for their 2007 classic Below the Heavens, which personally I haven't listened to yet, but I will get to it eventually. And this is just another brilliant hip-hop album from the underground, in my opinion. Like, we've gotten fantastic material this year from the likes of Rap Ferreira, Quelle Chris, and Mike. And now Blu Exile are added to the greatness with a lengthy jazz rap extravaganza that has just got some of the most intricate production I've heard this year, and some top tier lyricism from Blu. Like, I wasn't big on Blu because I remember he dropped an album last year, which I wasn't too fond of, but this is just amazing to me. Like, the jazz rap instrumentals on this album never fail to impress me. The sounds and the classic hip hop aesthetic work wonders for me. I love Blu's lyricism. His pen game is incredible. Topically, he's diverse, talking about his own struggles, black culture, influential figures in African musical culture, and he does this with just killer flows and creative wordplay. Only real issue is that it's asking a lot from the listener. It is a bit long, and some tracks can underwhelm me, either lyrically or instrumentally. But honestly, it's one of my favourite hip-hop releases of the year, and it's definitely one of my favourite jazz rap albums of the year so far. Honestly, it's brilliant, and I can definitely see myself coming back to this on further listens. It does ask a lot from the listener, I will mind you, but I think there is a payoff at the end of it.
Yeah, holy shit, Blu Exile just did this. Yeah, this is easily a standout in hip-hop this year, and I think that it's the best thing either of these have ever done. I do have to re-listen to their first album together. It's been admittedly a few years, but this is incredible. Sure, it's lengthy. Sure, it requires a certain amount of patience and a specific mindset to be able to sit through fully and completely swallow and understand. But if you're willing to do that, there's just so much here to unpack, so much here to experience. And, it's got incredible and eclectic instrumentals, and is easily one of the best produced records I've heard all year. Exile, when he's on form, he's a fucking magician, and he's certainly on form here. I think Blu pretty much doesn't have any, like, as far as I remember, I don't think there's a single Blu verse on here that isn't at least good. He's on top of his games, he's focused, he's so, I don't know, I'm kind of lost for words, and I'm also a bit tired, so I don't know which one it is. But yeah, Blu's just fucking excellent on this. The length does kind of bring this album down for me, and there are some tracks that I didn't care too much for, but overall, this is definitely an album that is worth sitting through at least once, and I definitely appreciate all the nods to black culture, and especially someone who's been getting into a lot of jazz recently, a lot of 50s jazz. I definitely can appreciate the nods and the respect paid towards the great African-American musicians of yesteryear, especially Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Cannonball Adderley, and everyone else he names here. And it's definitely an exciting album, and it's one of my favorite hip hop albums of the year so far.
I agree, heavily. My favorite tracks are Requiem of Blue, The American Dream, To the Fall But Not Forgotten, The End, and my least favorite track is Spread Sunshine, and I gave this album a 9.
Ooh. My favorite tracks were Miles, True and Living, Brightest Stars, Miles Away, Troubled Water, Requiem of Blue, and The American Dream. My least favorite tracks were Blue and African Dream, and I gave this album a light 8.
Moving on, we have A Hero's Death by Fontaines DC. This is the second studio album from the Irish post-punk band, and they managed to create another great post-punk album. That I'm here for. Jesus Christ, there's been so many great fucking post-punk acts lately. Like they managed to create just another great one. The instrumental palette on this album sounds fantastic. The guitars on here are great. I especially love with the melodies they create. I like how punchy the drums sound and the patterns are pretty nice. Plus, the instrumentals themselves can range from being like atmospheric and grimy to more melancholic in a way. I enjoy a lot of the vocals on here. I love a lot of the lead singer's poignant songwriting, the melancholic lyricism, especially on tracks like Oh Such a Spring, Living in America, and A Lucid Dream. And I took away plenty of great tracks on here. Bad moments are few and far in between, and this album is another welcomed addition to this like new post-punk revival kind of thing. And honestly, it's
revival,
the second wave. And honestly, it's just brilliant. That's all I really have to say. And thank fuck they're from Dublin. Hell yeah.
Fontaines DC's sophomore album is in a lot of ways more subtle and drab than their very exciting, very in-your-face debut, but that is in no way like a dig at this album. I think it's just as great. It's, after their more in-your-face, upbeat and energetic album, which I loved, I will say, WRLD was one of my favorite albums of last year. It was released last year, right? Not 2018. Am I correct?
I'm not too sure. I need to check it out.
It was last year. It was definitely last year. I expected more of the same from the band, but this is definitely a different yet certainly still welcome approach. A Hero's Death is more depressive, more brooding, quite dark, and the aspects that made WRLD such a great album are still there, just to a lesser extent. And I think Fontaines DC are still the same forward-thinking, no nonsense, tongue-in-cheek band. And if anything, this diversity just proves that they're not gonna. This is only their second album, and they're already experimenting so much, and that just proves that they're not gonna try and put themselves in a bubble. And I think they're gonna continue to be a very exciting act for years to come. And yeah, I'm really happy with this album. I'm really excited for the future of this band, and yeah, brilliant album.
Hell yeah. I need to check out their debut actually.
Oh, for sure. It's a lot more upbeat and in your face. This one's a lot more like dark and depressive.
Of course. The best tracks for me are Televised Mind, A Lucid Dream, You Said, Oh Such a Spring, and No. My least favorite track was I Was Not Born, and I gave this album a light 8.
My favorite tracks were I Don't Belong, Love Is the Main Thing, Televised Minds, A Lucid Dream, You Said, A Hero's Death, Living in America, and I tried, but I can't really pick out a least favorite track. I give this album a light to a decent 8.
Fair enough. Moving on, we have Such Pretty Forks in the Road by Alanis Morissette. This is the 10th studio album from the Canadian singer and songwriter, and Such Pretty Forks in the Road has a lot of admirable qualities about it, like its personal songwriting, Alanis' vocal performances, and the production, but after a while it just got fairly predictable and very unmemorable. I felt like a couple of tracks had a habit of dragging on for a bit too long, and it just got kind of tedious, and there isn't really a lot of memorability to just take away from this. But with that being said, I feel like this is one of her better albums, and that's all I really have to say, honestly.
Alanis Morissette sounds exactly like she did 20 years ago, and at this point, it's just not really interesting. I don't have much to say about this album. It's just very run-of-the-mill pop rock, and I don't think there's anything special whatsoever. It does have its moments, but it also has a lot of moments that just bore me to death and I don't find interesting whatsoever. Yeah, I don't have much to say, to be honest. It's Alanis Morissette album in 2020. It's what you would expect.
Of course. My favourite tracks from Such Pretty Forks in the Road are Sandbox Love, Losing the Plot, and Reasons I Drink. My least favourite track is Her, and I gave this album a decent 6.
My favourite tracks were Smiling and Reckoning. My least favourite tracks were Missing the Miracle and Her, and I gave this album a decent 4.
Alright, next, our final album that we're going to be talking about today, which is What Could Possibly Go Wrong by Dominic Fike. Oh, Dominic, you make this so easy, because a lot of things go wrong. This is the debut album from the Florida singer-songwriter Dominic Fike, and I only really know Dominic from his affiliation with Brockhampton. I haven't checked out any of his other music, but just the album title is too perfect, as a lot of things just go wrong on this album. Like, this entire album does not even sound finished. It sounds like demos. It is mixed like shit a lot of the time. And not only is it mixed like crap, but the songs themselves sound like the most basic cookie cutter and bland indie pop. Like, there's a couple of decent songs here and there, but the rest of the album is just so forgettable in how basic and generic it is. Plus, the songwriting is just extremely poor in this album too. Like, it's just not that good. There is a line though where people were saying that he said, I hope I get me too'd, but he didn't say that. He said, I hope they get me too, or something like that.
Yeah,
But it's not as in the Me Too movement. I don't know what he was trying to get at. Like, I don't know. It sounded like there was a D at the end of it, but I don't think he actually said it. But all you really need to know is that just stay away from this. This is not good.
You know, I first found out about Dominic Fike when Brockhampton kind of took him under their wing. And, you know, when I first heard 3 Nights, I really enjoyed that song and I was excited to see where Dominic would go and what his affiliation with Brockhampton would bring to his music. Fast forward like a year, everyone in their fucking mother knows the fucking 3 Nights and it's on every fucking radio station nonstop. And he's kind of blown up in absolutely no time, and his music is just not really exciting to me anymore in any way. Sure, he's got good charisma, his songs are often quite infectious, but a lot of the time the final product is quite unremarkable and just doesn't really do much for me and doesn't really establish much of an identity for itself. And then on further, I cannot talk, Jesus Christ. I need to start sleeping properly.
You and me
upon
too.
Upon further inspection, you really notice that the songwriting is really all over the place, and I think a lot of the time the song structures are catchy and infectious. Production, very hit or miss, but it's the songwriting that brings this album down a lot for me. There's some tracks like Chicken Tenders, which I think have a good melody, have okay production, or just exciting and infectious instrumentally and energy wise, but then the lyrics are just so stupid that it's hard to take anything about it seriously. And there are some good tracks here, but a lot of the worst tracks on here, if I think about them, the main thing I remember is how bad the lyrics were. And, you know, I don't know if he's writing them himself or if he's using a ghostwriter, but I don't know. If it is him, then maybe a ghostwriter would be helpful.
Maybe. Best tracks from What Could Possibly Go Wrong are Why, Whirly, and Politics and Violence. The worst tracks are Cancel Me, Come Here, and Chicken Tenders, and I gave this album a strong 3.
My favourite tracks were 2 genuinely fantastic tracks in Double Negative and Politics and Violence. And my least favourite tracks were 3 genuinely awful tracks in Come Here, Cancel Me, and Chicken Tenders. Especially
Hell yeah.
Cancel Me, which seems so unaware of... It's just so confusing.
I don't know.
I remember listening to it and being like, Is he making fun of cancer culture? What is he doing? What is this track trying to accomplish?
I genuinely don't know. This is confusing as fuck, dude. But
On that note, we've reached the end.
We're going to give our best albums and worst albums of July now. So, the bottom 3 worst albums. We'll start at 3, then go to 2, then to 1 each, okay?
Yep.
Alright, the third worst album of July, in my opinion, is None of Us Are Getting Out of This Alive by The Streets.
My third worst album of July was Trapt, Shadow Work.
My second worst album of July was Everything Strange Here by G-Eazy. By WRLD.
My second worst album of July was The Streets, None of Us Are Getting Out of This Life Alive.
The worst album of July for me is Shadow Work by Trapt.
My worst album of July is Billy Cobb, Zerwee Part 2.
Alright, moving on to our best albums of July. We'll do the same thing except we have 5.
I will say the top 4 here, I've pretty much given the exact same score and was incredibly hard to choose. So this doesn't really represent what maybe my end of year list will represent it. But now, this is temporary.
I gave my 2 and 3 pick the same score, so this was hard to choose from.
I gave my 1, 2, 3, and 4 picks the same score.
Okay, my number 5 was Telas by Nicolas Jaar.
My number 5 was A.A. Williams, Forever Blue, but a close call for Protomartyr.
Okay. My number 4 pick was A Hero's Death by Fontaines DC.
My number 4 pick was, and remember, these all have the same score, Blu Exile, Miles.
My number 3 is Lianne Havas, the self-titled album.
My number 3 is Oliver Tree, Ugly is Beautiful.
My number 2 is Ultimate Success Today by Protomartyr.
My number 2 is Fontaines DC, A Hero's Death.
And my number 1, my favourite album of July, Miles by Blu Exile.
My number 1, very narrowly and possibly temporarily, is The Beths, Jump Rope Gazers.
Nice. I like how diverse our list was to some degree. That was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's it. That's the end of today's recap. Thanks for sticking around with us. If you actually bothered to stick around for the 2 weeks that we've been gone, we're going to be back on track for a bit, but I'm sure there's going to be another break at some stage, but not for as long as we've had this one. But all we have to really say is thanks for checking out today's episode of the Taped podcast. Necessary links to our album of the years, rate your music, and such are in the description below. And all in all, see ya.
Wait, before we go, will we say what we're doing next week?
Oh yeah, shit. Next week we are going to be doing another worst to best with more guests. This time, the next worst to best is going to be on Modest Mouse.
Ooh.
Ooh.
And that's probably coming Saturday or Sunday. So
probably
keep your ears peeled.
Hell yeah.
Not this Saturday, Saturday and Sunday next.
Yeah.
Week. I don't know the date.
After this weekend, basically.
15th, 16th, 15th, 16th.
14th, 15th.
No, 14th's the Friday.
Wait, no, it's not. Is it?
2 IQ, Mick. 2 IQ.
Shut up. Shut up. You smell. You smell. Alright. Anyway, bye.
Bye-bye.